Hi, BookTube. Welcome back to the History Shelf. I am your host, Peg, and I am so honored today to have on my channel for our author interview, Bruce Henderson, discussing his latest book, which published today, Veterans Day, and that is Midnight Flyboys, the American bomber crews and Allied secret agents who aided the French resistance in World War II. Again, dropping now on Veterans Day. How perfect is that, right, Bruce?
How perfect. Thank you, Peggy.
Yeah, welcome to the History Show. I'm just letting the audience know we were chatting before we recorded that I love Bruce Henderson's work, and if you haven't read him yet, I highly recommend you do. Not only with Midnight Flyboys, but you have several books. You've many, and the most recent that I just fell in love with was Bridge to the Sun, the secret role of the Japanese Americans who fought in the Pacific in World War II. An outstanding book. So I just wanted to put a little plug out there for that book because it's near and dear to my heart. But welcome.
Thank you, Peggy.
Yes, thank you very much. You want to just introduce yourself a little bit to our viewers out there?
Sure. Well, I have been writing books full time now for, probably going on 30 years, and I have about 20 books, maybe somewhere between 20 and 30 books. I stopped counting. I'd done a lot of different topics previously, the Arctic exploration, even true crime. I came to World War II about 6 books ago. That's kind of the way I figure my life, not by years, but by books. And I've never left it and don't really plan to leave it because back then, though, those first couple of World War II books I did, the veterans were still around. There were still guys to go and meet and spend a couple days with and break bread with them. And I love that. I love that part of them. I loved them as a generation, and they were just, and they answered the call to fight a war that really had to be won.
Mhm.
And they did so, with a great amount of humility and modesty and all of that. And in the last couple of books that I've written about World War II, um, there are far fewer of them, of the vets still around to interview, and that's the sad part for the Midnight Flyboys. There were only 3 of them around, and they were 99 and 100.
Mhm.
And so then the challenge became to find their story um, somewhere else. And there would be certainly official reports in the archives, but I wanted to get into how they were feeling and thinking and all of that. So I try to uncover oral histories. I try to find any earlier interviews they've done. These guys that are now gone. I always reach out to the families. A lot of the families do have, a suitcase in the attic with grandpa's stuff, and I'm looking for letters, correspondence, memoirs, published or unpublished. And because the way I write history is I try to bring it alive, bring it to life for the readers. And different than the history books I read when I was in school, which is one reason I never majored in history, because the books were so dry and boring and, name and dates and that's it.
Yep.
And I want my history books and the ones I write, narrative nonfiction, to read like a novel, but it's all true.
Yes. That was actually a question I was going to ask for later on, but since you brought it up, um, narrative nonfiction, and in this case, would you call it narrative, history in this case?
Narrative nonfiction, I
Is
think,
that
is, yeah, what we would generally say.
um it does draw the reader in. Like you said, it has the novelistic aspects, and it kind of puts you right in the jump seat, as it were.
Mhm.
Um, when I came to this book, Bruce, I did not even, and I've read a lot of World War II history. Um, I had no idea, and there's a reason why. I did not know about what these guys did, and it was called Operation Carpetbagger. Um, and there was a reason why, is because it's been kind of under wraps for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit more about Operation Carpetbagger, what it was, and how you came to this topic.
Yeah, well, what's interesting, even though I've written several World War II books, I'd never heard of these guys either.
Wow.
And I was approached by a relative of one of the pilots, and she had in her mother's attic found some information about the grandfather that she never knew. He died before she was born, and she read it, and she was intrigued by it. She'd read one of my earlier books, and she approached me with it about doing a book on this. And so I really became intrigued because I'd never heard of it myself, and it was a story that that there was a top secret classification on for really 50 years after the war. And the reason it was because this was an alliance or collaboration between American and British intelligence and the U.S. Army Air Force. And the Army Air Force crews of B-24s were used to drop supplies, munitions, and Allied agents into Nazi-occupied France prior to D-Day. And Eisenhower had felt this started about 8 or 9 months before D-Day, that the resistance in France needed to get strengthened before our troops hit the beaches, so that they could, behind the lines, be blowing up a bridge, knocking out lines of communication, railroad tracks and whatnot to keep the German reinforcements from moving out too quickly to the invasion fields, and that was the reason for it. And it was so it's a combination of the fact that there was the intelligence services, and even after the war, when these guys were sent home, they were told that don't ever say what you did in the war because it's classified. The OSS was the U.S. intelligence agency. It soon became the CIA. We all know about the CIA. They all wanted to classify everything. They didn't want any of their tactics during the war being talked about. Some of these guys, they went to their graves without even telling their families what they had done during the war, which was really amazing. It wasn't until 50 years later, in the mid-90s, that the classification was lifted on this Operation Carpetbagger, and only then did these guys, start going to a reunion and sitting down with their buddies and talking about what they'd done. And it's truly amazing. I've actually had some families reach out to me and say, "Gee, I through you know more about what my father did than what he told us." And so the story was there, and of course, I love the uncovering of it. I love going down the rabbit holes on the research and finding the name in an archive of a pilot, and then wondering if he's alive now, and if so, what does he have that I can talk to him about? I mean, it's a mystery that I'm trying to solve. That's how I approach my books.
Wow. And how large was this operation? I mean, we've both read a lot of books on D-Day, I'm sure, and it's just like this is something obviously that was under wraps. We didn't hear about it, but it did have an impact on the success of that operation.
Yeah. Okay. So they had 2 squadrons of B-24s to start with, and it eventually became 3 squadrons, and that was about anywhere from 40 to 50 operational aircraft. They were flying B-24s, which were 4-engine heavy bombers. There were about 250 officers, pilots, and about 1,500 enlisted personnel, mechanics, administrative kind of people. They had their own air base in England that was really off limits. It was guarded. Nobody else could get into it. And these fellows were told, look, if you go into the village and sit at the pub, you can't be talking to anybody about what you're doing. And if you are found to do that, then you're going to be spending the rest of the war, in the brig. So it was very, very hush hush. And what they were being told to do was fly this aircraft that they were trained on in the States in a way that it was really never meant to be flown. The B-24 was a high altitude bomber that was, along with the B-17, conducting a lot of these bombing missions deep into Germany. And but what these guys were going to have to do to parachute these supplies into the right field in the middle of nowhere that's being lit up only by a couple of lanterns by French partisans who were waiting for the parachutes and waiting for the agents to come down. You have to be at 400, 500, 600 feet off the ground. And this was going to have to be at night. So the enemy didn't see them dropping these parachutes. So they were all flying alone at night, and they had to slow down to about 120 miles an hour, which is very close to that plane stalling. And when a plane stalls, it basically falls out of the sky. You can recover if you got enough altitude. At that altitude, they would just crash into the ground.
Wow.
So it was a very dangerous operation. And in fact, the first group of about 100 were brought into a briefing room and were told briefly what they were going. Dangerous, slow, night. And if any of you want to leave the room now, you can, and there'll be no mark against your record.
Right.
And they were given 5 minutes to think about it. And the guys looked around at each other, and not a single person got up. I did speak to somebody, one of the fellows in the room, and he told me, well, he said, I don't know if one guy had gotten up, maybe a few more, but nobody wanted to be the first one to get up.
Yes.
And that was the thing about these guys. They weren't looking to be heroes. I mean, these fellows that were fighting that war, they had a commitment and a mission, and their mission was to get this war over with and to get back home safely. And a lot of them volunteered even for a second and third tour for that reason. Okay, I have enough combat missions I can now recycle and go home, but this war is not over yet. I'm going to stay with it. The Carpetbaggers ended up in this 9-month period, dropping about 10 million pounds of munitions and supplies, some 500 Allied agents who were then going down and with their expertise, organizing the resistant forces, teaching them how to use explosives to blow up a bridge, that kind of thing. And after the war, Eisenhower, in his own writings, in his own memoirs, he said that the French resistance forces were equal to 5 extra Army infantry divisions, or about 75,000 combatants. And they were behind the lines. They were doing sabotage and so many important things to aid not only the liberation of their own country, but of course the advancement of American troops.
Yeah, and when you talk about the B-24, what made it the choice for an aircraft to use on these missions?
Because I say it wasn't meant for that mission, but then again, it was the right plane for the mission.
Okay.
And the reason it was because it could carry, its payload was about twice as much as a B-17.
All right.
It had a longer range, and it could stay in the air longer. And so it was the plane that they chose to do that with. It also had twin bomb bays, so the 2 doors would open up and the bombs would drop out like that. Well, what they ended up doing was using these steel containers that each could carry about 300 pounds of munitions and supplies, everything really from hand grenades to bicycle tires to you name it, in these containers. And each plane could carry a dozen of them. And they were loaded in the bomb bays just like bombs, 6 on one side and 6 on the other. And then they were dropped out. Each of them had a parachute hooked on it. And so again, it could carry twice the payload of a B-17, so they could get twice as many supplies in on one flight. And the fact that they were all solo flights was also very interesting because these bombers, some of their protection was being in large formations and having their own machine guns hitting any enemy aircraft. Well, these guys, it was all about sneaking in and not being seen.
Mm-hmm.
And they went in alone in planes that were painted all black, um, and um, and tried to sneak in. Of course, they weren't always successful in sneaking in.
Right.
The Germans did have some radar-equipped night fighters, and of course there was anti-aircraft fire too. But sometimes just the nature of their flying at that slow speed and low altitude, they could run into a hillside, clip trees, and they were lost that way too.
Right. And were there examples of that
Yeah, there
where
were
things did
examples.
not go according to plan?
And what I wanted to do was to follow, a few of those crews that something happened with them.
Yep.
And one crew I follow is the Simon crew, and they were interesting because they completed their mission, and then coming off the target area, they got hit by ground fire, and their plane started burning.
Mm-hmm.
And so the pilot issued a bailout order and stayed at the controls to allow all of his crewmen to get out first. That was kind of the ethos of the World War II bomber pilot, was you got to save your crew, even if it cost you your own life. And even the pilot was, as the last one out on that crew, was able to get out. Well, these 8 guys, even though they were parachuting out of the same plane at roughly the same time, they never really found each other on the ground, and they all had different uh, journeys. But one of them really rather quickly connected with the resistance forces and went through on one of the escape routes over the Pyrenees into Spain and ended up back in England before anybody else. Another one guy named John Meade, who was the bombardier of the Simon crew, he connected with a resistance group that he was with for a few days. They were making some plans to get him out of the country too, but then they asked him if he would mind staying, that they were a little short-handed, and
Yeah.
he could help them with some of the drops, because he knew how the aircrafts were coming in and whatnot, and he could be in the field and help them. Well, he said, I'll do it, but I don't want to be declared a deserter. So let's get a message to London and see if it's okay.
Right.
So about a week or two later, a message came in from London saying, you can keep him. So he officially became the only member of the Carpetbaggers who was a member of the French resistance. And for the next 4 months or so, 5 months, he fought in a very different kind of war than he'd been trained to fight.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's like one of the great stories that you tell in here, and that's where the narrative nonfiction comes in. What an adventure. You kind of followed him from, to bailing out to all the way towards the end, and then, I don't want to give away the ending or anything, but
Yeah. It
you
was
kind of,
important. Yeah, I thought I really wanted, as much as I like the pilots and the plane, and it is a story basically about pilots and planes, but I wanted to know what happened to the supplies that they dropped. How were they used? How effective were they? I wanted to know what happened to those agents, those Allied agents, men and women,
oh yeah.
who were trained by, most of them by British intelligence, and who dropped into that hole in the bottom of that fuselage, into that dark onto that dark field, surrounded by the enemy. And the other thing that I was very interested in was women in a World War II story. Well, I love getting them in when I can. It's not that easy because they weren't generally combatants like they would be today, in today's wars. And they're usually at home, and that's great too. But my gosh, these women were trained by British intelligence, and they were used because they were great at what they did, whether it was operate the radio or ride the bike between villages. And one gal riding a bike by herself was, as far as the German soldiers were concerned, looked a lot less suspicious than a guy or two,
Right.
going. And so they were, and one of them was Nancy Wake, and
I definitely
um,
wanted to bring her up.
yeah,
When I said buckle up to my viewers, I was just like, this is one heck of a ride. I was like, I wanted to know everything about Nancy Wake because I've never read anyone doing that before, any
yeah,
woman.
I wanted to know about her too. When I found out, I mean, the Carpetbaggers dropped um, about 10 women agents total, and some of them, I couldn't really get much more information on than their names, and trying as hard as I might and going down different rabbit holes. But Nancy Wake had left an incredible record of what she did. She was born in New Zealand, raised in Australia, and as a young woman went to London. This is in the mid 30s, became a newspaper columnist or correspondent,
Mhm.
ended up in Paris, and then was there when the Germans invaded Paris
Mhm.
or France. And by then she had married a French industrialist. But almost immediately she began working with the resistance forces.
Mhm.
Her and her husband both were very opposed to the Germans. And she was so effective that the Gestapo put a bounty on her head, dead or alive. And they were starting to close in on her when she realized she had to get out of the country because, there was going to be that knock on the door at midnight. She
Mhm.
got out of the country, went over the Pyrenees Mountains, made it into England, waited for her husband to join her, which he said he would, promised he would, and it would be easier than them trying to get out together. And he never made it out though. And as she waited and then realized that, I still want to get back in the war, she went and volunteered for the British intelligence service, and they recruited her right away because of her knowledge of France and her fluency in the language. And so she was trained and volunteered to parachute out of one of those planes. And she led not just one, but several resistance groups in central France. And one of the French partisans uh, who went through that period with her described her as the most feminine woman he ever knew until the fighting started, and then she fought like 5 men.
5 men. Yep.
Yeah,
That
and
was the caption under her photo, and I just love that quote.
yeah, and she did amazing things. Like at one point, their radio was out of order, and they needed to get a new radio, but they couldn't radio London to ask for a new radio. So she had to find another radio operator who would send that message for her, and the nearest one was 200 miles away, a 400-mile round trip, which she made on a bicycle in 4 days,
Wow.
and got to somebody who got the message to London, and then she bicycled back to her group. Couldn't walk for a week. She was really in terrible shape,
Mm-hmm.
but right away, then within a week, she was able to order, more supplies and whatnot to her groups. So yeah, she was amazing.
She's amazing. And also Violet Szabo
Yes, Violet Sabo.
or Szabo. I wasn't sure how to pronounce.
She was born in France. She to an English father and a French mother, and then she went to secondary school in France, but then they moved to England before the war.
Mhm.
And when war broke out, she actually met in London one of the officers of de Gaulle's Free French Army, a guy who had been a French legionnaire and was
Right.
very dashing, and and they had this wonderful whirlwind romance for
Mhm.
about 2 weeks, and then he went off to North Africa and was soon killed in combat there. And Violet was her motivation was revenge,
It's quite
uh,
personal. Yeah.
very personal. And Eton, the love of her life, was killed by these Germans, and she wanted to go and and do her part. And what was interesting is she and Nancy uh, didn't know each other until they got into training together and became very close and didn't parachute together, but parachuted into France within a few days of each other. And Violet's story is also um, really something.
Oh, it's very compelling. And I love the chapter that you did just talking about the intensity of the training these women underwent as well. Um,
Yeah,
they didn't treat them differently because they
absolutely
were
not.
women. Yeah,
And they not everybody who went into training graduated. And
that's right.
in fact, toward the end, Nancy got called in to the office of the head of the training program, and he said, "Well, Nancy, you've done quite well here, and you have a splendid record." And she said, "Yes, I know." And he said, "Well, how do you know what your record is?" "Well, um, I broke into your office last night and read my record." And he was really making a lot of noise and hooting and hollering, and any other service she would have been kicked out for that. But then she said, "That's what you've taught us to do.
Yep,
That's isn't that what we're supposed to do?"
that's
And
it.
he laughed and said, "Yeah, okay, but you know what? We're going to get you out of the country because you're dangerous."
Yeah, she was an A+ student.
Spirited, yeah.
And speaking of the agents, I thought this was another interesting aspect of the story is that I believe it was to protect them. They were known as Joes and Josephines, correct?
Yeah, nobody in terms of that, the airplane, the airmen who flew them in
Yeah.
knew their real identity. And that
Hmm.
was obviously in case the plane went down and they didn't want to be, have to have any information that anybody would get out of them, coerce out of them. But so the males were called Joes and the females were called Josephines. And at least as far as the airmen were concerned, once they got into France, they had their own cover names. I mean, phony French ID and all of that kind of stuff.
Hmm. And and then with the other thing we don't talk about too is not only with this is the danger of parachuting in, which again, you just write it so I could feel my elevated heart rate a little bit because I was in the Air Force and I've flown in some of these cargo, nothing like a B-24, but I can't even imagine. I wasn't made to jump. I didn't have to jump. I wasn't. But there was a scene where, Nancy
Yeah,
was kind of
yeah,
like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. But you know what?
yeah.
She pulled up her big girl pants and she just said, I'm here on a mission and I'm going.
She did. Well, Nancy actually was afraid of heights,
Oh,
and
can
she
you?
had that natural. Well, when I say afraid, I mean there's kind of an aversion to it. You can get sick, from
Yep.
heights. So she was going up in the plane, and first of all, it's like her first airplane ride, and she's going to jump out.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, and she hesitated when she was, and they called the hole in the bottom of the fuselage the Joe hole,
The Joe hole. That's right.
right?
Yep.
And it was only big enough, for one person to drop through at once. So they usually took two or three agents, and one would go, and then the plane would circle back, and then another one would go. Well, when it was Nancy's turn, she didn't move toward the hole, and the dispatcher was there and saying, "Mom, if you don't want to jump, we'll take you back, and I'll tell the pilot." And she said, "No, no, I can't. No, but next time we go around, if I hesitate, give me a good
Just
push in the back." And he did.
he did sometimes because if they didn't, it would be kind of like a wasted trip, right?
Well,
Like,
yeah, well, and two, Nancy thought to her, my God, I mean, they'll never give me another assignment.
oh, that's
If,
right.
if and after all this training, and I want to be down there, and I want to, so let's just go for it. So with
Let's
a little
just go
push
for
and
it.
shove,
Yes.
there she was off.
All right, so let's talk about some of the darker aspects here. What, Bruce, could an agent expect if they were unfortunately captured by the Nazis, the Germans, in occupied France?
They would not be treated like a prisoner of war under the Geneva Convention. Were they were taken after the Gestapo, which was usually uh, the folks that interrogated them and tortured them, they were executed. In some cases, they were sent to one of the camps, but they they were not surviving getting through the war if they were captured.
Right.
The airmen who were um, captured, and there were some, I follow one of them who became a POW out of the Simon crew, a fellow named Graham Hasty, who was their tail gunner. And I got letters that he wrote home from the prisoner of war camp, which was very interesting. The prisoner of war camp for American airmen were run by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. And, honestly, there was a real, the Luftwaffe wanted to treat, it's not like it was a vacation, but they weren't going to be subjecting them to beatings or anything. They were trying to treat the pilots like the way they would hope to be treated if and when they got captured by the
Right.
Americans. And but it was all bets off with the agents, whether they were British or American. They'd even be hung with a piano wire, in these camps, and
Wow.
it was horrendous and horrific, and
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, nothing uh I guess we wouldn't expect any different in that case. But could you talk about just some of the work that the agents did on the ground? You were talking earlier about
Mhm.
sabotaging uh uh Nazi like transportation routes
Right.
or
Well, and it kind of breaks down the before D-Day and after D-Day became kind of two different missions for the resistance. Before D-Day, there it was a lot of emphasis on organizing them and uh, amongst themselves, groups making sure they had communication with each other. The French resistance was not one group. I mean, there were communist
right.
I'm sorry, communist resistance groups, and there were, anti-communists. There were some that loved de Gaulle and some that hated de Gaulle, but they all had to work together as best they could, certainly for the benefit of liberating their country. And so this took some organization and communication, and this is the kind of stuff that the Allied agents like Nancy Wake were doing on the ground.
Hmm.
And they were, it was not easy. And they were also then having to uh, make sure that they had all of the kind of equipment they needed to carry out what were going to be pre-assigned targets for them to hit, not until D-Day,
Hmm.
but the day after D-Day. If they started hitting these targets before D-Day, um, they would be, the Germans would find them and get them, and they
Right.
would be taken off the field. But after D-Day, the theory went, and it was true, that the Germans were very busy fighting on the invasion beaches, and now the resistance forces could get active behind the lines and really create havoc. Really, um, there was a German Panzer tank division that the Germans were trying to rush up from southern France to get to the Normandy beaches. The resistance forces all along the way were hitting their targets. And this Panzer force was so late getting into the Normandy area that they just turned around because it was too late to kick the Allies back into the sea.
Hmm.
That had to happen within the first 48 hours if it was going to happen. But by day 5 or 6, there was 500,000 Allied troops coming ashore and working their way inland.
Hmm.
So, they really were effective in terms of what they were doing and what they were carrying out.
And it seems like it's such a an important role that they played. And of course, it's the top secret, confidential nature of the mission that they didn't get the recognition from the public. But was there like, and I'm just curious, just from my own standpoint, was Eisenhower and some of these other guys, were they aware? I mean, did they give, like, what was their impact? And then were they recognized in a more quiet way
Well,
within the services?
Eisenhower, did recognize the effectiveness of the French resistance forces, and that what they were equal of in terms of on the battlefield, and but in terms of public recognition, there was nothing until 50 years later
Right.
when they received the gold medal from the Congressional Gold Medal, which is the highest civilian award given by Congress. The Carpetbaggers, along with other members of the OSS, received that. So, of course, by then, a lot of those guys were already gone, which is, the sad part of it. So, in their lifetime, a lot of them didn't get not only any recognition, but couldn't even talk about what they did. One of the surviving carpetbaggers, Bill Becker is his name. In fact, he just turned 100. And Bill was determined last year to make it to Normandy for the 80th
Mm-hmm.
reunion, or not reunion, but anniversary
Anniversary.
of D-Day. And he put his suitcase out in the living room about 6 months beforehand to remind himself that he had to live that long to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And so he made one of these veteran flights. And when he stepped off the plane onto French soil, he said, "I made it." And there was a New York Times reporter there who took that quote, and they made it the quote of the day on the front page of the New York Times with all of their other coverage of the veterans coming back to D-Day. So, a few of them lived to get some recognition, not enough of them, unfortunately.
Mm, very true. Very true. There was I'm just gonna mention from your book that and you mentioned it, like there's a whole chapter on D-Day. And just to get a sense for the audience, like how important the French resistance and these agents were, is that in the wee hours, you say, before some 133,000 troops waited ashore,
Mhm.
there were more than 1,000 sabotage acts that were
Mhm.
carried out using
Mhm.
tons of high explosives,
All
parachuted directly in for that purpose.
all over France,
I mean,
and it was
so yeah.
it was amazing. There was a cost, obviously, as there always is, to the
Mhm.
carpetbaggers. I talked about those initially. There was about always they tried to keep about 40 to 50 operational aircraft at all times.
Mhm.
They lost in that 9 month period 33 um, 33 B-24s and 233 pilots and airmen were lost. And
Mm.
we talked about that. There was a number of ways, ranging from being shot out of the sky by the enemy to bad weather to mechanical to just flying so low and slow and hitting a hillside or clipping some
Mhm.
trees and going down that way. Of the agents that were dropped into France, um, 91 of the men and 13 of the women, and I'm talking about the total, not just the total. There were obviously some that got into France other than the carpetbaggers.
Mhm.
The British were dropping some, and some of the others were coming ashore by boats and whatnot. But in all, there were some 500 Allied agents operating in France, before it was liberated. And of those, 91 men, 13 women were killed.
Were killed.
Yeah.
Mhm. And as far as the aircraft go, were all accounted for, or were some like I can't recall if was did they were all accounted for, right? Or was one never seen again? I'm trying to.
I think they all eventually were accounted for, not immediately.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, they could find wreckage and whatnot. In fact, there's actually an amazing photo that you may be able to show of the wreckage of the Simon crew taken by the next morning by a French farmer as some of the kids were standing on the on the wreckage of the plane, which is pretty amazing. But it also showed what you know, my gosh, when the plane hit the ground, you know, it just disintegrated, and how
Mhm.
all those guys got out. You know, they didn't have any idea because they all parachuted out at 600 or 700 feet,
Mhm.
you know, less than 1,000 feet, and that crew, it's amazing that everybody made it out of that crew. That was unusual. Usually when a plane went down, at least some of the crew went down with it.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever been in one of those old World War II planes, you know, those B-24s or B-17s, and the what impressed me when I got in one was how claustrophobic they are. I
Really.
mean, you're not even talking walking, you're talking crawl spaces, and how you can get even from how you can get out of it when it's going sideways or upside down. I mean, it just it defies the
It
imagination.
boggles the mind.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, well, and you're mentioning earlier, uh, just the fact that, so many of our World War II vets, how many are left,
yeah.
and
Do you know how
so
many are left? I can give you the number.
tell me.
16 million Americans served in World War II, and actuaries believe there's about 40,000 left,
Oh,
and that number will be halved next year. And even that sounds too many to me because I'm finding so few in these individual, you know, stories that, so,
hmm,
you know, a lot of them, of course, aren't able to, you know, to talk or about what they did. Or, as I said, the three that I located, you know, one of them really basically didn't have much memory as to what happened. I mean, they're so old now.
sure, sure.
But yeah, we're losing them very,
Hmm.
very, and they'll be in our lifetime gone, all of them.
Mm. It'll be a sad day for sure when that happens. Um, well, does that impact your decisions as far as what you write or what you're writing next, or
Well, what impacts my decisions is who I choose to follow in a book. And because I have to have enough information
yeah.
about them. And there are characters, you know, that I would have loved to have included, you know, in the cast more close up. Most of my books, I try to take 6 to 8 characters and just keep coming back to them so you really get to know them.
Hmm.
I'm the opposite of Cornelius Ryan, who would have, you know, a cast of hundreds, and you might talk about this guy for one paragraph and never come back to him. Well,
Hmm.
that is a nice thing too, because a lot of people get their names in the book. But what I go for in, you know, the narrative nonfiction is I really want to get into their mind and their hearts and their thoughts, and so it becomes it's a real selection process.
Hmm.
I'm just even a few books ago, I would interview, you know, 20 or 25 people just to find five. And
Wow.
now, as I say, there are even fewer to interview.
Hmm.
So it's tough. I'm going to keep doing this, and I want to keep doing World War II books just as long as I can. I just love this story. I love that it's, you know, it was so black and white, so good against evil. And it was such a war that had to be won. And these folks, everybody was pulling in the same direction. I remember growing up, my grandmother telling me about her victory garden. I mean, everybody was on board. And
Hmm.
compared to the kind of divisiveness we have now, you know, I
Yeah,
just send me back.
I know.
You know, it's like it seems so much simpler, although it was still, you know, there were tragedies and there were, you know, I mean, war is never fun, but boy,
Right.
the right guys won.
The right guys won, and I think that's what that's why World War II is still such a it's so popular in movies and fiction and in history. Um, it does seem like a time where everything was really black and white, and that,
Yeah.
and I think we like that type of certainty.
And I'm glad to see younger generations embracing World War II history.
Oh,
There was some thought not that long ago that as the World War II generation stopped reading, that maybe the World War II books would go down. Well, that has not happened. It's still we call it a genre. World War II genre is really healthy, very commercial, and like I say, it's the younger generations that are reading them.
I love it. And that to me is so encouraging. Um, and just because I'm curious, how long did it take you to write this book?
Uh, 2 years,
Two
which
years,
was on the shorter side.
shorter side.
Um, so 2 to 3 years is sort of normal.
Mm-hmm.
About half that time is with research. The first half of my time on a book is research. I don't start writing until I've got at least 90% of the research I need. That's not to say that, there isn't questions that come up when I'm writing, but I really want all of that done. I don't want to have to write chapter 1 and then go off and research chapter 2.
Right,
I want it, all there as much as I can get.
right.
And yeah, that's the process.
Okay. Well, I'd love to know. I know it's early days yet, but do you have another project in mind?
I honestly do have something in mind, and it's goes back to my author's note in Midnight Flyboys about the suitcase that I found as a young boy at my grandmother's house that had the uncle I never knew who was killed in World War II. He was a fighter pilot who was lost in the North Sea, going on a mission to Berlin, and I grew up with this, everyone talking about what a great guy Uncle Bob was. And I found this suitcase one day that had pilot silk scarf, his goggles, his medals, and every letter that he wrote home, about 100 letters, from his training days to like 2 days before his last mission that he didn't come back from.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that moment on, I became kind of obsessed, maybe a word, but also just hungry to know as much as I could about not only my uncle, but about flyers and pilots. And what the real interesting thing, Peggy, is all of the books I've done. This is the first one. Midnight Flyboys is the first one I've done on pilots. So I've decided the next one I'm going to do on my uncle and his group of fighter pilots,
I
who are
love it.
actually turned out to be very legendary. They were the first group to fly the P-51 Mustang, and which became the most successful fighter in Europe and really defeated the Luftwaffe. And I've got the letters from my uncle, and I've already reached out to other families, and they also have suitcases in their closet and their letters. And
All
so
right.
I want to bring that to life.
Well, I
And
can't wait to read it because I loved how you began the book about your Uncle Bob. And I thought that was such a wonderful lead in to the story.
thank you.
So it kind of tells us there's more to come.
Yes, there is.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to mention about the book or?
Boy, again, I just want to say that I'm really honored that it's being published on Veterans Day, and I hope that it's an honor for me to have written this and to have told this story, and let's all say, give them cheers, and we're thinking of them and remembering them.
No, absolutely. Well said. I've said it before on this channel. I love our military, those who came before, those who serve now, and those to come. But this is a fantastic, fantastic book, Bruce. I just wanted to let you know I enjoyed it so much, and I really encourage all my viewers out there at the History Shelf. You've got to check out Midnight Flyboys, because yeah, buckle up is right. We gotta
Buckle up, I love it.
yeah, because there
And
were some moments in here I'm like, oh my God.
and thank you for what you're doing too, because you're really bringing history to life too, and it's great, Peggy. I love
Well,
it.
thank you so much. I mean, as a reader, I do what I can, because I'm not out there doing the hard work of researching and writing, but at least I can have the fun of reading and talking to authors. And so, Bruce, this was a treat for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
We wish you every success with the book. And, for your next book, I hope you'll consider coming back again.
I sure will. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thanks again, Book2, for joining me here on the History Shelf with my host. I'm your host, but with my guest, Bruce Henderson. Midnight Flyboys out today, Veterans Day. Check it out. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.